Today's daf we're going to be learning is Menachot Daf Nun. Today's daf is sponsored by Ruchi Summer in honor of Meryl Sasnowitz's birthday. Happy birthday to our mom. You continue to inspire us with your dedication to learning Daf Yomi and your other Torah endeavors and commitment to the community. Have a beautiful day and year ahead with much love from us all. Mazal Tov. And again, our learning for at least the next few days, who knows how long, will be for the safety of our soldiers, for the safety of all the citizens of Israel and places around the world. Hoping for good news soon. And today is Tanit Esther, tomorrow is Purim, so everyone should have a good fast. And tomorrow we will learn as usual. So again, assuming sirens, all that, but the plan is to teach at the usual time. Okay, we will get started with, finish up just the very end of yesterday's sugya. We started with this question, if you remember. Rabbi Chia bar Avin asked Rav Chisda, tzibur that doesn't have to be dim or musafim, which one comes first? Remember, they don't have enough animals for tomorrow's korban tamid or today's musaf. What do? We thought that we could bring a source, the second source they tried to bring. First they tried to learn from the Mishnah. They said, no, that's not what the Mishnah means. I'm just talking about the order, not what if you don't have enough. And then we thought maybe we could learn it from these 6 tlaim, hamubukarim, that they leave for Shabbos and 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. In the end, we say it's only talking about the korban tamid. And then we started, Ravina asked, but shouldn't there be 7? Because you have to worry about the day after. By the way, I realized only after class, this issue of the Ravina's question is there should be 7, because what about Tuesday? When we said really meant, what about the first Sunday morning? Even though, there's a concept, lo adu rosh, which is Rosh Hashanah can't come out on Sunday, Wednesday, and Friday. It will never come out on those 3 days. Which is why Tuesday makes no sense, because Tuesday would mean it would be Shabbos, Rosh Hashanah, right? Rosh Hashanah would be Sunday, Monday, and then it would be Tuesday morning. The Gemara was discussing, the Girsa that we had in our Gemara was discussing the possibility that it would be Tuesday morning, and then it talked about Erev Shabbat. That's right. Remember, what about the one before and what about the one after? But we said, actually, we were talking about the one on Sunday, not Tuesday, and even though it said Erev Shabbat, it really meant Erev Chag, because according to Lo Adu Rosh, that makes no sense. But that could have been a time before they had all the calendar and the determination and all that it would just come out whatever day it came out on. But only later did they institute that it can't come out on certain days, because that would put Yom Kippur potentially on, we would have 2 days of, it would be, right, Yom Kippur can't be on Friday or on Sunday. There's all different calculations about why these days couldn't work. Anyway, we're not going to get into that right now. But the point being, in the end, they say, oh yeah, it's just a mnemonic, the whole Rosh Hashanah, 2 days, and Shabbat. And then they prove it. We're now starting on the third line. Daikanami dekatani kidei l'Shabbat. It says, I can't think of the word exactly how to translate it, but like Shabbat, okay? Like Shabbat Rosh Hashanah and 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, but lo katani l'Shabbat. It was not for Shabbat and 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. It doesn't say that. It says, kidei l'Shabbat, to be like Shabbat, meaning remember. That's our way of remembering it. Okay, so the language fits that. Shema mina. Now, before we get started with this next section, it's a little bit confusing. So what I want to do first is I want to read the Mishnah and know that you have the Mishnah down pat before we start changing the Mishnah. What's going to happen in the Gemara now is, because certain things don't make sense, so they're going to start changing things. So we're going to do what we call a chisur mechasra, which is it's missing some words, but it's more than just missing words. They're going to change some words and add in whole sections, and we're going to see. So the second part of the Mishnah went like this. Okay, it starts with there's 2 debates between Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis. One has to do with the incense, and one has to do with the tamid. Okay, the 2 korbanot tamid of the day. So it started off with the tamidim, and it said, we're starting from about the third line in the Mishnah, at least by me, Lo ikrivu keves baboker, yakrivu bein ha'arbaim. Tanakama says, okay, if I had time, if it wasn't a war going on, I would have organized this in a chart and see the psukim, the sections of the Mishnah in front of you very well, so you could see how we're going to change them. But try to keep it in your head well, or look back. The Mishnah starts off with this line, which we're soon going to change. If you didn't bring the keves in the morning, you can still bring the other one in the afternoon. Okay? It's not a problem. If you skip the morning, you can do the afternoon. Comes Rabbi Shimon and he says, no, that's only if you're ones or shogeg. Remember yesterday we gave the example, right? If you were stuck in the miklat and you couldn't do it, so you were stuck in your shelter, you couldn't do it, right? That's the way to remember him. But if you were mizidim, if you intentionally just didn't bring it, then you can't bring the korban. That was the first. Then you can't bring the afternoon. The second machloket they have is lo iktiru k'torah baboker yaktiru ben harbayim. So sounds just like the tamid. If you didn't do the k'torah, you can bring it in the afternoon. Oh, there's the alert. It's funny, Stacey, I saw you jump a little. You got a few seconds before me. Okay, well, we'll learn until the siren goes off, and then we'll take a break, and I'll come back. Okay, so now, and for those not there, you can hear how loud this beep is when it starts blaring on your phone. It kind of jerks you awake. Okay, so now they say, V'kula hayta kreva ben arbaim, and the whole thing, second warning, and everything is brought ben harbaim, meaning when you bring it in the afternoon, you bring the whole amount that was supposed to be brought, both in the morning and the afternoon. And then it had this very weird line, and they start talking about what the first thing you would do to consecrate. When would you consecrate items? So the golden altar that's in the Heichal is michunach. The first time you do it is with the K'toret Samim. You have to put the incense on it. The Mizbach HaOlah is done with the Tamid of the morning. The outer altar is, again, consecrated for its first use. The Shulchan with the Lechem HaPanim on Shabbat specifically it has to be. And the menorah with the 7 candles in the afternoon. Okay? What that has to do with anything is unclear. So the Gemara starts off, and it actually quotes, this is why it's very important to notice, sometimes they just sort of quote random words in the Mishnah, this time they're actually quoting very particularly. We kind of thought, because the chinuch comes right after the discussion of the Ketoret, that that's why they were bringing it. The Gemara is now going to say, okay, so let's look in the Gemara. They quote first the first line, Lo krivu keves baboker, then you bring it in the afternoon anyway. And then comes Rabbi Shimon, Amar Rabbi Shimon, V'kula hayta kreva ben arbaim, she'em mechanchim et mizbach hazav el b'ktoret hasamim. But they really don't want to quote that one. They really want to quote Mizbach HaOlah with the keves of the morning. That's why we're going to see that line is why this whole end part was brought. Really for the keves, for the korban tamid. So you didn't really understand anything yet. Don't worry, because we didn't really explain anything yet. We're just setting up the groundwork. So the Gemara asks, Chinuch ma dekar shmei? Where did chinuch come into this whole thing? What does it have to do with anything? Right? It's first use. It's missing words, and this is how it should read. Now pay close attention. Remember how it started? If they didn't do the keves in the morning, they could still do the one in the afternoon. Now they're going to say, no, the Mishnah really reads like this. Lo yakrivu keves baboker, lo yakrivu ben arbaim. You cannot bring the afternoon one. B'mid dvarim amurim. Well, when is this true? Okay, we're going to see there is a case where you can, there is a case where you can't. And our Mishnah is discussing the case where you can. It's not that you can, it's not that the Mishnah is wrong. It's just saying the Mishnah was talking about a particular case. So we start off with, don't bring, if you didn't bring the boker in the morning, in the keves in the morning, you cannot bring the one in the afternoon. This is if the mizbech was never used before. If you've never used the mizbech and it wasn't yet inaugurated, by what? How do we inaugurate it? That's why that last line, that second section is there. Right? If it was inaugurated with the keves in the morning, then you're fine. But if it wasn't inaugurated with the keves in the morning and now it's the afternoon, you can't, right? So you never used the mizbech before. You can't bring the one in the afternoon because you haven't brought the one in the morning. But if it was already inaugurated, totally fine. Bring it in the afternoon, okay? Because it's no problem to bring it in the afternoon. So when our Mishnah said, if you didn't bring it in the morning, you could bring it in the afternoon, was talking about a case where it was already inaugurated, which is, by the way, 99.9% of the times. Because it needs inaugurating once, right? Either once in history, or if the Mizbech, something happened to it, right, and they need a new one, okay, but then it's once. Amar Rabbi Shimon, Matai. Now comes Rabbi Shimon and says, okay, you want to say that 99.9% of the time you can bring the one in the afternoon. I disagree. I'm going to limit that. It's only if you were shogeg or ones. Matai, bisman sheyuan ufsim, or shogegim. Aval im hayu mizidin, lo ikrivu keves baboker, lo yakrivu bein arbaim. But if they were mazid and they didn't do it and then they didn't do it on purpose, you can't bring it in the afternoon. Okay. So now we have, you can bring it. You can bring it if it wasn't brought, but only if you had already inaugurated the mizbech. If you hadn't inaugurated the mizbech, you can't start in the afternoon because the only way to inaugurate it, this is why we brought the end of the Mishnah, the only way to inaugurate it is with the keves in the morning. can't inaugurate it with the keves in the afternoon. Now we get to the second part of the Mishnah. Lo ktiru k'toret baboker, yaktiru ben arbaim. Okay, so now, minahani mile. So now they want to know, so the k'toret you can bring in the afternoon. Remember, the only debate between them was, do you bring the whole thing in the afternoon or not? Minahani mile. So where do we get all this from? Ditanu Rabbanan, the Braita says, V'et keves hasheni taseh ben harbaim. By the way, we're going to quote some psukim from last week's parsha, from Tetzaveh, we just read. So keves hasheni taseh ben harbaim. Now they say, what does it say? The second keves, do in the afternoon. What does that sound like? Sheni ben arbaim, below rishon ben arbaim. You can't bring the first one of the day in the afternoon, meaning if you didn't do it in the morning, you can't bring it in the afternoon. But we said that was only if the mizbech was never inaugurated. So comes the Braita and says, "B'med dvarim amurim." What is this referring to? Shelo nitchanech hamizbech, aval nitchanech hamizbech afilu rishon ben arbaim. But if you already inaugurate, then you could. Now, where did they get this from? So the pasuk that we learn it from this past week's parsha starts off with "V'zeh asher ta'aseh al hamizbech." This is what you should do on the mizbech, and they darshan that to mean for the first time you put it on the altar. And then when the first time comes, so the first one goes in the morning and the second one, right? You can only do the second one in the afternoon. You can't do your first one in the afternoon. Okay, meaning if you never did it before, you can't do your first one. But, okay, the Braita continues, Aval nitchanech hamizbech afilu rishon ben arbaim, because the pasuk is not referring to that. You could even bring your first one of the day in the afternoon in a regular case, once it was already inaugurated. Amar Rabbi Shimon, again, this Braita is quoting now the dissenting opinion. If they intentionally didn't do it, lo yakrivu keves baboker, lo yakrivu ben arbaim, but lo yaktiru k'toret baboker, yaktiru ben arbaim. But then Rabbi Shimon has this distinction. He only penalizes you, okay? He only penalizes you for the keves if you didn't do the tamid in the morning. But if you didn't do the k'toret in the morning, you could still do it in the afternoon. In 2 minutes, we're going to get to why that distinction. Hopefully in 2 minutes, assuming there's no siren. V'chi kohanim chatu mizbeach batel. The first, before we get to that, they have a question. Wait a minute. Because the kohanim sinned, the mizbeach is going to be batel, and really meaning what, the rest of the tzibur can't get their korban? Seems very unfair. Amarava hachi kamar. Now this is what it means. Lo yakrivu hein aval achirim yakrivu. All of a sudden we get another. Okay, we've redone this Mishnah a bunch of times, reinterpreted. We're now going to say, if the kohanim who messed up, so they can't bring the korban, but other people can. It's a very interesting debate. Who are the other people? And this is a bigger, broader question about responsibility, which is a big topic discussed nowadays, discussed always. Who's responsible? So, who's responsible for the fact that the tummy wasn't there? Let's give some background. There's Mishmarot Kuna. Everybody's on duty 2 weeks a year, plus on the holidays, right? 2 times 24. There were 24 Mishmarot Kuna. That gets you to 48, and then there's holiday weeks. Now, the way it was divided by day, each group, Mishmeret, was divided by day into families, which families were in charge every day, and within that there were jobs. So the person whose job it was, in Yoma it says, the person whose job it was to bring the tamid in the morning, it was their job to do it in the afternoon. So some people say the person whose job it was to do it in the morning, if they didn't do it, they can't do it in the afternoon, but anyone else on that mishmar can do it. Other people say, no. Another interpretation, a very obvious one, is the whole mishmar can't do it because they're all ultimately responsible. If someone didn't take care of it, they should make sure it gets done. And if they didn't, well, then they're out, right? They can't do the tamid in the afternoon. Someone else from a different mishmar comes in and takes their place. So it's a very interesting debate about who's responsible. Is it just the individual, or is it the whole, all the people on duty for that week should have been aware of what was going on and make sure it happens. Moving on. Now we're going to get to this big question. What's the difference? Lo k'tur k'tor b'boker yaktiru ben arbaim. So why does Rabbi Shimon think that the k'toret you can do in the afternoon, but if you were mazid, you can't do the keves in the afternoon? Because it was very uncommon, okay? It was very rare. Some people say it was very rare that Kohanim did the k'toret. It was like a once-in-a-lifetime thing. And ma'atra means ma'ashra, tough and chin switch. It was known to make people rich. If you do the k'toret, it brings you wealth. So people did it. So there was no need for the rabbis to penalize you for not doing it on purpose, because no one would ever miss the chance. And if they did, okay, we're not going to penalize that one person. We want to make rules to penalize people when it's a concern. When it's not really a concern, so no. Amar Rabbi Shimon. V'kula hayta kreva bein ha'arbayim she'em mechachin mizbach hav ela b'ktoret hasamim shel bein ha'arbayim. Now, remember, this whole thing, according to the Gemara, was brought because of the mizbach ha'olah with the tamid shel shachar, and that related to that first line. But now we're going to go in depth into these details of what inaugurates the mizbach, what inaugurates the shulchan, and some of the details here. So first they say, okay, so now it said, now we didn't have this, okay. Ours said, b'ktoret hasamim. Okay, I just realized this now. Right, yeah, that's why. I knew something seemed like it was missing in the Mishnah because all the others defined what time and what action. Apparently there's words missing in the Mishnah, and it said, Ela b'ktoret hasamim shel bein ha'arbayim. The ktoret hasamim of the afternoon was what inaugurated it. So now they say, V'hatani b'ktoret hasamim shel shachar. But there's a braita that says it was actually the ktoret hasamim of the morning, not of the afternoon. Dichtiv, baboker be'etivot hanirot yaktirena. Okay, so now we're going to, I skipped. Tenaihi. Okay, so what do they answer? It's a machloket tanaim. Some people say it was the ktoret hasamim of the morning. Some people say it was the ktoret hasamim of the afternoon. Okay, there was a debate about this, which maybe is why there was a girsa problem in our Mishnah, and it was actually somehow dropped out of there. I don't know why. So now comes Abai and he says, I want to prove which one makes more sense. Amar Abai mistaber k'mad amar b'ktoret hasamim shel bein ha'arbayim. Why? Dichtiv baboker behitivot hanirot yaktirena. Another pasuk from last week's parsha, the very end of the parsha. In the morning, when Aharon would be meitiv the nerot, yaktirena. That's when you're going to do the ketoret. Now, first of all, what is hatavat hanerot? The Rambam says it's actually lighting, and they would light the candles both in the morning and the evening. This Gemara really doesn't work well with the Rambam. You'll see why in a minute. Leitiv hanerot, according to most of the people, means cleaning out. Okay, what happens? You light the candles at night. Anyone who has, oil in their chanukiot knows you have to clean it out. You have to put in the new wicks. It's a whole process. That they would do in the morning. And that's what this pasuk is referring to. Now, if you hadn't lit them the night before, then how would you be fixing them in the morning? There would be no fixing needed. So what did it say? Because it's talking about the ketoret in the pasuk, and it says yaktir, that's when you do the ketoret. Well, if you hadn't done the ketoret if you haven't done the candles from last night, which means it's referring also to you can't do the ketoret unless you did the ketoret last night, and that's why the ketoret of the evening is the one that inaugurates. It's a drasha. It's not exactly a clear-cut reading, but that's the connection. Now, according to the Rambam, that you would light it in the morning and light it in the evening, this is a weaker, right? It doesn't really seem to work with this, because this is basically saying there's no way to do hatavat hanerot unless you lit them the night before. Well, where does the one who get it, who says it's the morning one? Well, pretty simply, Gamar mimizbach ha'olah. Well, just like the mizbeach ha'olah, the altar, is inaugurated in the morning, well, seems likely the ketoret hasamim. Now, they don't say this, but theoretically, it's possible this machloket is based on an age-old issue, which is, in Judaism, the night always follows the day, right? The day always follows the night. We start by Ye'erev, Vayiboker. But in the world of korbanot, it starts in the morning, really. The day is always described by the morning until the nighttime, because the nighttime you don't really do so much. It's sort of like the end of the day. So, things get burned that weren't burned throughout the day. And there's sugyot where they talk about that. And in the world of sacrifices, specifically from the day, and this is kind of pulling at both those things. Do we do it from the night? Or it's not really the night, but it's the evening, toward night, and the morning. That's possible, but I don't know. So now they're going to make an assumption here. The shulchan is inaugurated by putting on the lechem apanim on Shabbat. Now they're assuming that means it's inaugurated, but it's not the only way, right? It's the only way to inaugurate the shulchan is by putting on the bread on Shabbat. But what about sanctifying the bread? Does the bread get sanctified if you put it on a regular day? So their assumption sounds like it does, because the only thing you need that has to be done specifically on Shabbat is for inaugurating purposes. So that's what the Gemara says. But they ask it as a question, because everybody knows that you're not... let me give some background. When you put the bread on the shulchan is a klei sharet. We've learned this before. You put something in a klei sharet, it becomes sanctified. So when you put something on the table, the bread, that's when it becomes sanctified. So the Gemara says the fact that the shulchan, putting the bread on Shabbat, is what consecrates the shulchan, sounds like, but you can make your bread holy anytime you put it on there. But that is completely not true, and they know that's not true. So they question this line in the Mishnah, saying this Mishnah seems to imply that would be true, that it would be sanctified if I put it on Tuesday, no problem. But that's completely not true. So they say, no, you misread it. He gufa kamashmalan dechinuch v'kiddush d'shulchan b'shabbat. The Mishnah is actually telling you both. Sanctifying it and inaugurating it is all done on Shabbat. Kiddush katani seifa, just like this next line. Okay, when we talk about the menorah, v'loat menorah ela b'shivani rotah ben arbaim, and the menorah only with its 7 candles between, in the evening. Well, the menorah, we know there's 2 actions. Okay, with the shulchan, it's inaugurating it and sanctifying the bread. With the menorah, it's inaugurating it and lighting it. Now, the lighting also gets done at night. So basically, they're saying this line about the menorah seems to be talking about both lighting it and inaugurating it. So therefore, this line about the bread must be talking about sanctifying it and inaugurating the table. So with that, we resolve that issue. Now, we're going to bring another braita where we're going to infer something and then say both the inferences we're going to infer from here are completely wrong. And how does that work? And then we're going to say, well, you really don't infer that. Okay, we'll read it differently. So, Tana Rabbanan, Zehu K'toret Alta Liyachid Al Mizbach HaChitzon V'Hora'at Sha'ah Heta. This is okay, let's go background before we read this. K'toret was brought on the inner altar, the one that's in the Heichal, the small golden altar. Remember, it's much shorter than the other one. It's much smaller. It's 1 by 1 cubit, which was the size of each of the corners of the one outside. And the height was 10 amot high, and this was 1 amot high. Okay. Now, they say this is the K'toret. This K'toret, there was some K'toret, She'alta liyachid al mizbeach hachitzon. There was a K'toret that an individual brought on the outer altar, v'hora'at sha'ah, and it was a one-time thing that this was allowed. To bring, for an individual to bring incense on the outer altar. So the Gemara says, Heicha, where was this? When did this happen? Amar Papa b'Nisiim. The Nisiim, if you remember, in the dedication of the Mishkan, the Nisiim each brought their gifts. That's Parshat Naso. And there they each brought a gift. And they each brought one, as part of their gifts, they brought a whole bunch of different things. There was incense. And they offered the incense on the outer altar. That was the only time an individual, and it was only allowed that one time, the individual could bring on the outer altar incense. Now, what can you infer from this line? Well, you can infer 2 things about. One thing about an individual. An individual can only can't bring voluntary K'toret on the outer altar, but would imply that an individual can bring on the inner altar if they want. They decide, I'm bringing K'toret, I can bring it on the inner altar. That's number 1 assumption, which is not true. Okay, so let's read it. It sounds like an individual can't ever, other than the Nisiim, can't bring, right, they were the heads of each tribe, can't bring on the outer altar, but it sounds like if you want to offer, you can bring it on the inner altar. And v'tu, and additionally, al mizbech hachitzon yachid hu delo. Now it says an individual only brought once in their life, right? One time in history on the outer altar. But it sounds like the community could if they wanted. Okay, they can voluntarily offer, and it will be brought on the outer altar, which is also not true. So hatzibor makarvu. It sounds like the tzibor can. And now we're going to bring a braita that shows that both those 2 assumptions are completely incorrect. V'hatanya, it says in a braita, you might have thought an individual, let's say I want to bring incense to the altar. You might have thought I'd have to. Why would I have to? Well, pretty obviously, because Korani Bai, we read the pasuk like this pasuk. Motzat tzvatecha tishmor v'asita. You have to keep your promise. I promised I was going to bring incense, so I have to bring incense on the altar. Talmud Lomar, but the pasuk says, Lo ta'alu alav k'toret zara. It says, do not bring any other incense on the altar. Okay, like not the incense you weren't commanded to bring. So that proves on the inner altar, an individual cannot bring incense. What did we say? This was saying the individual brought a one-time thing on the outer altar, which seemed to imply, but they could bring on the inner altar if they voluntarily offered it. No, this braita says no way, no how. You can only bring on the altar the Torah that you're supposed to bring daily, twice daily. Okay, so now the braita continues. You might have thought an individual can't say, I want to bring incense and bring. Why would an individual not be able to? Because there's no even parallel obligatory track for incense for an individual. No individuals bring incense other than that one time, right? But otherwise, individuals, there's no obligatory incense for individuals. Turning now to Amud Bet. Aval tzibur yehe mevi. But maybe the community could bring because, why? Well, for the exact reason we just said. Shemevi chova kayotzeba. Maybe there's a parallel track. The community has an obligatory ketoret, so maybe the community can also voluntarily offer incense. Talmud Lamar, lo ta'alu. Because it says in that pasuk, lo ta'alu, plural, not as a community either. Yachol lo ya'alu ha-mizbeach hapnimi. Okay, well that would only tell you, because that pasuk is referring to don't bring on the inner altar anything other than the 2 daily ones. But ya'alu ha-mizbeach ha-chitzon, which is exactly what we inferred. Oh, the inference was the individual brought only once in history on the outer altar, but the community could also bring whenever they want on the outer altar if they want. But no, this is going to prove they can't even bring on the outer altar. How do we know that? Because it says, Et shemen ha-mishcha v'et ketoret hasamim lekodesh, k'chol asher tziviti chayasu. The shemen ha-mishcha and the ketoret hasamim are brought only the way God commanded. And God never commanded that they could bring them as a voluntary offering. So from here, ein lecha ela masha amor ba'inyan. You only have the ketoret according to what it says in the Torah. Never says in the Torah anywhere that the community can voluntarily bring ketoret, so no. So what do we have here? We have this one line that said there was a hora'at sha'ah. Once in history, in the time of the Nisim, they brought incense on the inner altar as individuals. We thought that inferred communal could bring if they wanted, or individuals could bring on the inner altar. We said both of those are not true. So how do you read that source then? Amar Papa, very simply, lo mabaya kamar. It's a lo mabaya structure. What does that mean? Lo mebayat tzibur, it doesn't even need to bother telling you. This is so obvious it's not the case. Lo mebayat tzibur mizbeach hachitzon de lo eshkachan. Of course, the tzibur cannot bring on the outer altar because there is no place where it ever talks about the community bringing incense on the outer altar. Right? The only time it talks about it is on the inner altar. And there's no individual who ever brings incense on the inner altar, so of course that's not going to be the case. And there we rejected both our options, right? The two things we said. Ela afilu, what the chiddush of this source was to say, even yachid al mizbeach hachitzon de eshkachan b'nesiim hora'at sha'ah hayta. So even an individual on the outer altar, which you do have, there is a precedent for it in the time of the Nisi'im. The chidush is hora'at sha'ah. Even that one, where you do have somewhere in the Torah where it says that could be done, that was a one-time thing in history, never to be done again. With that, we resolved all our problems. Now we're moving on to topic 2 of today, which is Chavitei Kohen Gadol, the griddle cake offering of the Kohen Gadol. We've talked about this before, and in fact, this Mishnah we've seen earlier in the Masechet on Daf Chet, which is the Kohen would have to bring, the Kohen Gadol would have to bring every day an isaron of solet, make a mincha out of it. Half would be brought in the morning, half would be brought in the afternoon. That's what we're going to talk about now. And he had to bring it from his own money. That's why they say the Kohen Gadol had to be wealthy, because to bring this every single day costs money. Chavitei Kohen Gadol lo hayu ba'im chatzaim. Now, they already tell you how it's not done. Don't bring it half in isaron in the morning and half in isaron in the afternoon. They would make, by the way, 12 loaves out of it, and half would be offered in the morning, half would be offered in the afternoon. Ela mevi isaron shalem v'chotzei. You bring a complete isaron, split it in half. Makriv mechza baboker or mechza ben arba'in. Now, there's a big debate among the commentaries how you do the splitting. Okay, the Rambam, Hilchot Maaseh Korbanot, Perek Yud Gimel, Halacha Daled says, basically in Halacha Gimel, he says you shape it into 12 loaves, and then he says, Achar ka cholek kol chala v'chala l'shnayim ba'omed. It's a very interesting explanation. He says you split each loaf in half by estimation, which is so interesting, right? You would think it would be exacting. No, you estimate, okay, you break each roll in half, and you bring half loaves on the altar. It's a very interesting way of splitting it, right? You would think, take the dough and split it, or make 12 loaves and 6 go in the morning, 6 go in the afternoon. He has a unique opinion. Not everyone agrees with him. I sometimes split the dough, or half the loaves, okay? But he has that interesting opinion. I wanted to mention it. So now, the Mishnah continues. Okay, we're going to see the source for this soon, why he has to bring all of it and then split it and not say, oh, let's bring half in the morning and half in the afternoon. Kohen Shevi, now we get into a unique case, and right, we're going to see two unique cases like this, all based on the same principle. Kohen Shevi Mechza Shacharit V'Meit. Uminu Kohen Acher Tachtav. If you brought, and we learned this also in the past, if you brought half in the morning and then died, so now your other half is left. Uminu Kohen Acher Tachtav. And now there's a new Kohen Gadol. Now what we say, the Kohen Gadol has to bring it with his own stuff. So, Lo Yavi Chatzi Isaromi Beto, V'chatzi Esrono Shel Rishon. Okay, actually, I think this should say something else. Right. V'lo Chatzi Esrono Shel Rishon. In other words, there's two options of what he could bring. Either, right, he can't bring just a half an isaron from his house, even though that's really all he needs to bring. And he can't bring the half that the other Kohen had, because he can't bring someone else's. Ela mevi isaron shalem v'chotzeu, but he has to bring another complete isaron from his house, and splits it in half. Makriv mechza umechza aved. He sacrifices half. He brings half on the altar, and the other half has to go to nowhere. Right? It gets destroyed. We're going to see later how we destroy it. Nimtzeu, and not only that, but nimtzeu shnei chatzim krivim u'shnei chatzim ovdim. Also, the half that was left over from the other Kohen has to be burned. So basically, you end up with two isarons, right? It's a tenth of an ephah, which is about 2 kilo. You have two sets of 2 kilo, where one will be destroyed and one will be brought. Okay, this the Kohen Gadol had to do every day, and every Kohen I think has to bring these on their inauguration day. It's possible. Yeah, I don't remember all the details, but I think so. But they're talking about the Chavitein Kohen Gadol here. Now, Tanu Rabbanan. Now we're going to have a Braita that's going to bring the source for all of these things, and it's going to have 3 sections. The first is the source, why we know we have to bring the whole thing and split it. Then it's going to talk about what if it got impure or lost, half of it, okay, the one in the afternoon, which is going to be very parallel to the case of the Kohen Gadol who dies, and then we're going to bring the case of the Kohen Gadol who dies. Okay, the difference between bringing them here is, number one, there's an additional case of impure or getting lost, and they're going to be a little more connected to the Psukim because it's a Midrash Halakha, whereas the Mishnah doesn't connect it to the Psukim at all. Tanu Rabbanan. Ilu Ne'emar, so section 1 of the Braita. Ilu Ne'emar mincha machatzit. If you had said a mincha that's half an isaron, and I would have said, Hayiti Omer, maybe chatzi isaron mi beito shacharit umakriv, chatzi isaron mi beito arvit umakriv. I would have said, bring half an isaron in the morning, half an isaron in the afternoon. Talmud Lamar, but that's why it says in the pasuk, machatzita baboker umachatzita ba'erev. Okay, it says half in the morning and half, but half of it. Machatzita with a mapik in the hay, with a dot in the hay, which means it's half, which means there's a whole, and half of it gets brought in the morning, half of it in the afternoon. Mechza mishalem hu makriv. You take half of a whole item. HaKetzad, how does that work? We already know this, but the Braita is explaining, just like the Mishnah did. Mevi isaron shalem, you bring the whole isaron v'chotzeu, and you split it in half. Makriv mechza baboker mechza ben abram. You can see where they get to the different interpretations about how to split it, because they don't really tell you. Split the dough, split the rolls, right? The loaves, right? They're not really rolls. Call them loaves, because remember, they're matzah. Nimtza, okay, second part of the Mishnah. Braita. Nimtza mechza shel ben arbaim. Sorry, nitma mechza shel ben arbaim. If half from the afternoon got impure, o sha'avad, so as you brought the one in the morning, then the half of the afternoon gets impure or lost in the meantime. Yachol yavi chatzi isaron mi beito arvi v'yakriv. You might have thought, just bring another half an isaron from your house, and I'll sacrifice it. Talmud Lamar, machatzita baboker umachatzita ba'erev. You need, it's half in the morning and it's half in the afternoon, meaning now you're bringing half that wasn't part of a whole. Right? So, mechza mishalem hu mevi. It has to be half of a whole. So, haketzad, so what do? Same thing as you did with the Kohen Gadol dying. Mevi isaron shalem mi beito v'chotzeu, makriv mechza u'mechza aved. So you're going to have to bring a whole new isaron, and half of it's going to go to waste. And nimtzeu shnei chatzim krivim u'shnei chatzim ovdim. So you're going to have 2 half get brought, and 2 halves get lost, right? Get destroyed or ruined, right? One might have already been ruined because it became impure. Kohen Gadol shekriv mechza shacharit v'meid. So now we go to the Kohen Gadol, again, repeat of our Mishnah, with just connecting it to the Psukim. And they put in a new one in his place that day. And now he has to bring the afternoon one. Yachol yavi chatzi isaron mi beito, chatzi isaron shel rishon, right? You might have thought he brings a half an isaron from his house, or a half an isaron from the first one, right? And he brings the half isaron from the first Kohen. Talmud, right, the one who died. Talmud Lamar, umachatzita be'erev, mechza mishalem hu mevi umakriv, right? He has to bring half of a whole. Hakitzad, how does he do it? Maybe Isaron Shalem v'chotzeu, he brings another Isaron. This is all just very repetitive, and splits it in half. Umakriv, umechze avad, nimtzeu shnehem shnei chatzim ovdim u'shnei chatzim krivim. So again, you're going to end up with 2 half Isaronim get sacrificed, and 2 of them get sent to, be lost. Okay, now we're going to see what we do with them. Tana Kameda Rav Nachman. A Tana brings a Braita, not a Tana, but a person who teaches Braita, right, and memorizes them and brings them to the Beit Midrash. So he brings before Rav Nachman the following Braita. Mechza Rishon u'mechza Sheni. So the first one of, let's say, the Kohen Gadol who dies, and the one of the Kohen who now brings the new Kohen Gadol. Those 2 halves, what do we do with them? Ti'ubar tzuratan. You have to let them first go bad, meaning usually leave them till the morning. And only then, yatsu the beit hasrefa, and then you burn them. When things get disqualified, often we burn them right away. Sometimes we do ubar tzuratan. So now the question is, why do we do ubar tzuratan? So Amalei Rav Nachman, bishlama rishon. I get why the first one, because the more sanctified it is, you might have to wait till something happens to it, it depends. You'll have to see like this. But bishlama rishon ichaze la krava. The reason why you can't just burn the first one of the Kohen Gadol who died is because it was ra'oi to be sacrificed. In the morning, it was ready to go. The problem is the Kohen Gadol died. So because of that, it was already ra'oi for the Mizbeach, attained a certain level of sanctity. You can't just burn it right away. You have to let it go bad. But the second one of the second Kohen Gadol was already, when he designated, he knew it was going to just go to waste. So it's not really so sanctified that you would have to wait till something goes bad before you burn it. So we're going to have 2 answers to this question. Number 1, you could just say maybe that source, that Tanaitic source is like Rabba Bar Avua, who says, now the more disqualified something becomes, the higher the disqualification, the more easy it is to say just burn it right away. So the worst of the worst is pigul. Okay, we've learned that so many times. It's karet if you eat it. Rashi says, de pasul chamorhu. It's the most severe psul, upasul de oraita, and it's forbidden by Torah law, and it needs tzula, right? So even that, according to Rabbi Ravua, would need before you burn it, right? So the worse you make it, right? The worse the disqualification, the easier it is to say burn it right away. But he says, even pigul has to be yibor tzura, and then basically it's not a question. Everything that gets disqualified has to be yibor tzura. And then obviously this would be. But Rav Ashi Amar, Afilu Tema Rabbanan, even if you don't hold by Rabbi Ravua, okay, and you think pigul doesn't need yibor tzura, so why even need yibor tzura here? Kevan de be'idna de palginu. In other words, then you're going to say you only need yibor tzura if it was ra'oi la'krava. And we said this one wasn't. So how are you going to respond? Because we knew from the beginning it was going to be destroyed. So it wasn't going to be used. I say no, because be'idna de palginu, what do you mean? When you divided it into 2, Ibai hai makriv, Ibai hai makriv. You could have chosen this one, you could have chosen that one. So what do you see? You could just have sacrificed it, right? So it was ra'oi lahakrava, because 50% of it was going to go to waste, but you didn't know which 50%. Each one, theoretically, you could choose and bring on the altar. That was enough to say, this could have gone on the altar. Because it could have gone on the altar, we can't just destroy it right away. So that answers the question in 2 possible ways. Now we're going to end with 2 short sugyot. One is how you prepare the Chavitei Mincha Kohen Gadol. For those who went to the Menachot workshop, right, you know all the Menachot were prepared in different ways. Some were baked, some were fried, some were baked and fried, some were baked and boiled, some were, right, there's all different ways. So, Itmar, Chavitei Kohen Gadol Kitzad Osinotam. We're going to have a machloket here. Rabbi Chia bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Ofa v'achar kach mitagna. First you bake it, then you fry it. Rabbi Asi Amar Rabbi Chanina, mitagna v'achar kach ofa. They both say you have to fry and bake. The question is, what's the order? The second opinion says, first fry it, then bake it. So what is this based on? It's based on a word that nobody knows what it means. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, kavate didi mistabra. Okay, I quote Rabbi Yochanan, I think my opinion is right. That first you bake it, because the word in the pasuk says, a machvat b'shemen te'aseh. Okay, it says on a machvat, which is a frying pan, a type of frying pan, te'aseh, murbechet, tivi'ena, tufini minchat pitim takriv. Okay, so we're going to focus right now on the word tufini. So, tufini. What is tufini? It's a very weird sounding word, and it's a word that nobody really knows what it means. Tofenu na'eh. It's what we call notrikon, like an abbreviation, short for bake it beautifully. which means when you bake it, it has to be beautiful. If you fry it first before you bake it, it's not going to be beautifully baked. So it's going to be beautiful if you bake it straight as dough. Rabbi Asi Amar Kavite Didi Mistabra Tufeni na. Bake it na. Now, what is na? Na often means raw. It doesn't mean raw here. It means partially cooked. Okay? Na in the Torah often means partially cooked. It comes up by Pesach, Korban Pesach. Anyway, partially cooked, meaning it has to be fried first and bake it once it's partially cooked, which is fried. Kitanai, and in fact, there's a machloket tanaim, and in this machloket tanaim, we're going to see a third opinion. Tofeni na. Rebbe Omer tofeni na'a. Okay, those were the two we just saw, partially cooked or beautifully, meaning not fried first. Rabbi Yossi Omer tofenu rabba. Bake it many times, meaning both na, itle na, itle na'a. He wants to do both. What does he say then? Bake, fry, bake. So you bake it first without frying it, then you bake it after frying it. So you do 3 stages, and that covers all the opinions. Tanan hatam, last thing for today. You do the kneading of it, the setting up the loaves, all of that is done inside in the Kodesh, in the Azara. This is the big issue that we're going to start today and continue in tomorrow. There's there's a lot of opinions about why it's Doche Shabbat, where we get it from that it's Doche Shabbat. So, Menachot, where do we get that you can prepare the loaves on Shabbat? Amar Rav Huna, Tufeni na, Tufeni na'eh. Okay, we're going to do the same thing about Tufeni na'eh. It has to be cooked beautifully. If you bake it from yesterday, it's going to swell, right? It's going to not look very good the next day, right? Everybody loves fresh bread, right? It's supposed to be beautiful when it gets offered. Rav Yosef, he said, what do you mean? There's all sorts of methods. Okay, there's an interesting one. You put vegetables around it, and that keeps it fresh, and it keeps it from kind of swelling. I don't know what the word is exactly in bread, but swelling is, the Hebrew word is litpoch, right? It'll kind of expand a little bit. If you keep vegetables around it, that'll keep it from not doing that. So that's not a good answer. So we'll see 2 today, and then we'll stop here. Debei Rabbi Yishmael Tana te'aseh va'afilu b'Shabbat te'aseh va'afilu b'tumah. Okay, the beginning of that pasuk says al machvat b'shemen te'aseh. It doesn't say ta'aseh, make it. I hope I didn't read it wrong when I read it the first time, but it's actually, I probably did because the nikudot are really small. I wasn't really looking carefully, but it's te'aseh. It will be made. Now, it will be made sounds like it will be made no matter what. Meaning afilu b'Shabbat va'afilu b'tumah. Okay, so te'aseh va'afilu b'Shabbat te'aseh va'afilu b'tumah. This is 2. One is the one we're looking for, which is even on Shabbat they can be made, and even if in impurity. Remember, Tumah hu tra b'tzibur. If it's a communal thing, which is communal, even though it's really for the Kohen Gadol, but it's for everyone. So, right, because he represents. So it can even be done in impurity. But the important point was for us was here's the first source really, because the first one was rejected, but this one is accepted. Amar Abaye Amar Kra Solet Mincha Tamid. It says Solet Mincha always. What does this word Tamid reference? Oh, Harehi Kimincha Tamidin. It's like the mincha that goes with the Korban Tamid. The mincha of the Korban Tamid, remember the mincha comes with its own libations, and it's brought every day, even on Shabbat. So if that overrides Shabbat, this overrides Shabbat as well. Okay, and we'll get to more drashot on this tomorrow, more sources for how we know that preparing the mincha chavitin is doche Shabbat. And we happen to do it without a siren. Look at that. Okay, so we're going to do a quick review. Still a chance for the siren to go off. We'll see how fast I do this. So we have we started with the proof for how we know it was just a mnemonic, the Rosh Hashanah and Shabbat. Then we got to a rereading of the Mishnah, which instead of saying Lo krivu keves baboker, you could do it in the afternoon. It was really you don't do it in the afternoon if you never inaugurated the Mizbeach by doing it in the morning. And then, but if you inaugurate it, then you could still do it in the afternoon. And that was connecting part 1 and part 2 of part whatever of the Mishnah, which weren't really near each other, but we're connecting them. And that explained why we brought that whole thing about the inauguration in the Mishnah. And we had Rabbi Shimon's dissenting opinion, which is not if you're mezid, right? If you're intentional, we're going to penalize you in a regular case where it was already inaugurated. Theoretically, you could do it in the afternoon, but not penalize you. And we discussed why we're not penalizing you for the Torah, because there was no reason, because everybody really did it. And we discussed why, if we penalize you, though, actually someone else could bring it. So it's not like never gets brought. It does get brought, just not by the person who was doing it, or maybe not even by the mishmar who was doing it. From there we got into the idea of responsibility and who's really responsible. Then we talked about which actions, right? It was the Ketoret Asamim Shel Shachar that inaugurated, or the evening one, and then we had a debate about where each one proved it from. Then we talked about the Shulchan Melechem HaPanim, and how it wasn't only talking about inaugurating, it was also talking about consecrating the bread. What consecrates the bread? Only when you put the Lechem HaPanim on at the proper time. Just like the candles only get lit at its proper time. Okay. Then we got to this issue of that we had this Braita about the Ketoret, the one-time Ketoret that happened in the time of the Nisi'im, that they brought it on the outer altar. And we thought that implied all sorts of things about the Tzibor being able to bring it on the outer altar, and the Yachid, the individual, being able to bring it on the inner altar. And then we learned none of that is true. No one can really voluntarily bring. It was only one time in history where that was permitted. Then we moved on to the Chavitei Kohen Gadol. How were they prepared? Number one, how were they? That you brought the whole dough and then split into two, and that was all darshan from the pasuk. What if you end up with these situations where the afternoon one becomes detached from the morning one? Then you have to bring a whole saron again, because it always has to be half of a whole. And then we ended with how it's prepared: fried and baked, or baked and fried, or baked, fried, baked. And then we had the last issue of it's Doche Shabbat, and what are the sources for that? And we'll come back to that tomorrow. Wishing everyone a good day, a safe day, and Nishma B'Sol Tovot.